Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's talk, View from Gold Mountain, Commemorating Asian American Civil Rights Through Monuments, features the artists Cheryl Lee Gwynn and Stuart Wong, who will discuss the making of this monument in response to the landmark court case, Territory of New Mexico versus Yi Shun, the 1883 lawsuit that brought about a change in the law allowing Chinese people and then later non-Christians to testify in court. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Our program is a collaboration between the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and the Museum and Gallery Studies program in the Art and Design Department at Queensborough Community College, and it builds upon the KHC's longstanding tradition of connecting core themes within both Holocaust and human rights education, of erasure and tragedy, of visibility and resilience, with how they are expressed and taught within and at museums and educational centers. Our event is co-sponsored by the Asian American Asian Research Institute at the City University of New York, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, and the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. After the presentation, please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now to kick things off, it's my pleasure in welcoming Kat Griffin, Program Coordinator and Faculty Member in the Gallery and Museum Studies Program at Queensborough Community College and Faculty Member of Museum Studies in CUNY's School of Professional Studies. Kat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laura, Dr. Laura Cohen, for the warm welcome and introduction. And thank you also to Associate Director of the Kupferberg, Marissa Hollywood, for her work on this program as well. Also to our Art and Design Department for their support, especially Kathleen Wentrek, Chair of the department. As Laura mentioned, I am faculty member and program coordinator for Gallery and Museum Studies at Queensborough Community College, where we have the only associate's degree in the discipline offered in CUNY, making it a uniquely affordable entry point into the field in our region. I welcome questions about the program, and my email will be in the chat, so you're welcome to reach out. Welcome to our students, to our presenters, thank you, and also to all the community members who are present. As Laura mentioned, this program is one in our ongoing Human Rights and the Museum series, which in part comes out of a living land acknowledgement resulting from the Native American Survivance Project at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, which took the form of a colloquium, exhibition, and publication starting in 2018. For this reason, Indigenous voices and viewpoints are centered in many of the series events. For example, our last program from fall 2022, featuring curator Darian Turner from the Baltimore Art Museum. She spoke about her exhibition, Stripes and Stars, Reclaiming Lakota Independence. That program and all the programs in the series are available through the KHC's YouTube channel and through their website as well. Now for today's program, within the planning group for this series, we've been discussing the growing interest from our students and community members in monuments, in those we encounter in our daily lives, and those which we visit for the purposes of commemoration. We imagine that this will be one of a number of programs addressing monuments over the next few years. Additionally, and for good reason, in public discourse, there has been much interest in the toppling of U.S. monuments that represent versions of American history that are inaccurate or are celebratory of a racist, sexist, or xenophobic nationhood. At the same time, in the context of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, it may be public works speaking to the atrocities of the Holocaust that come to mind first when considering monuments. given the importance of remembering and learning from the past. Even so, as Laura mentioned, the KHC and this program series seek to address narratives of survival and resistance as much as those of remembrance. And for that reason, we plan for this first program on monuments in our series to be one that celebrates a landmark change in US law, allowing Chinese people and later non-Christians as well to testify in court. I'm very much looking forward to our presentations and conversations with Cheryl Leo Gwynn and Stuart Wong, the co-creators of the monument View from Gold Mountain, which memorializes territory of New Mexico versus Yi Shun, an 1884 lawsuit. The monument outside of the Bernalillo County Courthouse in Albuquerque, New Mexico, commemorates this important advance in civil rights. Prior to 1884, those not of Judeo-Christian religious tradition could be excluded from testifying in court through the argument that they could not take a binding oath regarding the veracity of their testimony. With the court case, the testimony of Chinese Americans was finally deemed admissible, paving the way for other marginalized groups to testify and opening doors for additional advances in the rights of Asian American and Pacific Islanders, Native peoples, and others. With that brief introduction, I'm pleased to welcome and introduce more formally our speakers, Cheryl Leo Gwynn and Stuart Wong, who will speak about the view from Gold Mountain. Cheryl Leo Gwynn is a fourth-generation Chinese American born in Canada during the U.S.-Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 to 1943 and the simultaneous Chinese-Canadian Exclusion Act of 1920 through 1957. A Chinese American father and a Chinese Canadian mother, her family was separated by the Twin Exclusion Acts for 6 years. The legislation was lifted in 1943, but not enforced until the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In 1945, her family was united in Seattle. This history serves as a guide for the artwork of Cheryl Leo Gwynn, a multimedia artist, educator, and administrator who creates awareness of the Chinese American journey and in particular, the lives of women. Cheryl earned her Master's of Fine Arts at the University of Washington in Metal Design in 1977, and she defines herself as a maker of things, most recently in working in digital collages and animation. Cheryl also has a deep history with public art in particular, both as a maker and a commissioner on the local, county, and state levels, and she will be discussing this today. Stuart Wong relocated to the Pacific Northwest from Hawaii in the 1980s, a cultural shift and environmental change which was transformational for the artist. This transition influenced and informed Wong's work, which reflects his cultural identity, heritage, and diversity. Our contemporary social justice climate has compelled Wong to shift focus from studio work to social justice, historic, and culturally informed public artworks. Wong's art reflects his experience melding craft with technology, and he explores in mixed media, sculpture, and installation, ceramics, baked enamel, metals, concrete, natural and manufactured materials, adding layers of purpose, meaning, and intrigue. Wong's work ranges from the two-dimensional paper arts to three-dimensional assemblage and sculpture, as well as large-scale public arts. Now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to hand over the Zoom to Cheryl and Stuart. Thank you both most warmly for being here today.
Thank you. Stuart and I are very pleased to be a part of this seminar. The opportunity to talk to people through our art about the history of the Chinese is very important to us. So let's first talk about the collaboration. The View from Gold Mountain title is very, very important. Stuart and I have been friends and colleagues for many, many years, but this is the first project we've actually worked on. So getting to know one another through a shared project has been very important. But the thing that I think we do share is the knowledge that the Chinese looked at the United States during the gold rush and said, you know, the streets are paved with gold. So they called it the Gold Mountain. And their dream was to go forward into the United States to look for the gold. So when they got here, they didn't exactly find gold, but this is the view that they had from the Gold Mountain. And now I want to introduce Stuart Wong. We will both begin to show you just a few slides of our studio work, work that kind of led up to this monument. Stuart?
Hello, everyone. I'm Stuart, and I consider myself a mixed media constructivist artist. My studio works is more about the materials and experimentation. So after I earned my BFA from Cornish in design, I started to take on more experimental studio work. And in 2000 is when I took on my first public art project, and that was with the Wing Luke Museum. And since then, I followed additional public art projects. And so I found that by working in the public art sector, it served as an awakening for me to more addressing more of social, political, and economic issues concerning Asians and other ethnic groups as well within our history and current issues as well. I'm also finding that there's a need that I want my work, my visual work, to bring to the Asian American, bring the Asian American and Pacific Islander experience to the 21st century conversations, American conversations of racism and equity and inclusion. So I'm finding myself seeking out projects that provide opportunities to continue in advocacy work for social, political, and cultural, historical awareness and documentation. This particular image is showing one of my public projects that follow the museum project, the Wing Luke Museum project. This is Sammamish Park and Ride. And this project commemorates and honors the Native American Salish, in particular basketry arts, as well as the environmental conservation practices that the Native Americans focused on preservation and holistic approaches to respecting the environment when harvesting materials for their utilitarian usage. So this park and ride honors the basketry arts. And that's the reason why you're seeing cedar frond images and basket weaving patterns. And above is the reflection of the weaver's palm with a pattern, a woven pattern in the palm, and then in the pupil of the eye. And so this is the maker's homage to the maker and their basketry arts. And this is the bark shredding tool. Next, Cheryl. This is an ephemeral installation commemorating, not commemorating, but honoring the oceanic region, particularly the cultural traditions and the cultural arts. So it's reflective of the material usage and pattern and colors that were integrated into their traditions, their arts and traditions. And so this is a park in Burien, Washington, where I've created this ephemeral installation. And so it's also honoring the environment as well. So the materials are very naturalistic materials to honor the environment as well. Next, Cheryl. This is the Wing Luke project. It started out as an exterior project. The Wing Luke Museum did relocate from 7th Avenue in the International District, Chinatown of Seattle, to King Street into a historic building called the East Kongyik Building. So the original, previous home was previously an auto garage. And so they moved into a much larger space and they did some preservation in their renovation. And so this particular installation commemorates the immigrant who is the fabric of this community, the Chinatown International District. And so the theme that I created for this installation is about migration and immigration. And that's where I came up with the concept of the boat, because the boat back in the history is the vehicle that strongly represents the immigration experience, comprised in these windows. And actually the body of the boat is comprised of the doors and windows that I salvaged from the building. Once these went into storage, and I went through the storage and salvaged these materials and used them for the body of the boat. And in the windows are images of the immigrants making their journey over on the boats. And then there's a story panel onto the right, and then I suspended also cloud patterns up above in the ceiling, and then worked out all the color palette for this. So this, as you can see, is titled Our Heritage, Our Journey, Our Dreams. So this is much about the immigration experience. Next. This is the story panels that are on the right side that you saw in the image, the previous image. And this panel, the top panel, is what you're seeing here depicts articles, items that the various ethnic groups would be representation actually of the various multiple ethnic cultural groups, and also reflective of the community, the fabric of the community. So the diversity of the community in reference to the Chinatown International District in Seattle. And then the lower panel depicts the American experience after the fact that these immigrants have settled in the Chinatown International District. And so what you're seeing here commemorates numerous different events, such as the burning of the Chinese businesses, the internment of the Japanese, places where the laborers boarded, and let's see, occupations such as the railroad building, the cannery work. Also, personal experiences such as a person looking into a Japanese variety store, contemplating on transitioning or assimilating into a Western style dress, for instance. And okay, next, Cheryl. This is my most recent project that I'm working on. This is a conceptual model of a planned installation for the waterfront, Seattle waterfront. And this commemorates a Chinese expulsion that happened all throughout the West Coast. And this would be a local Seattle installation that would be sited on the waterfront where the Chinese were loaded onto ferries and transferred to the Bay Area. The title is called Exclusion, Expulsion, Expunge. And that is cross-referenced with this towering X that I have that is separating the mob, which is on one side, and the Chinese laborers are on the opposite side in a face-off. And since the Chinese are laborers, then they were brought in, to work in the labor industry, from mining to paving the road, to help building the city. So many labor jobs. So they were laborers, and so that's why I included. I felt that it was important for me to include their personal belongings with some tools of the trade, such as pickaxes, for instance. And then you have the scales of justice above, that's weighted heavily towards the mob side. So the power struggle here is expressed through the injustice, the imbalance of the scales here. And then throughout the events, throughout the history of, you hear documented stories about Chinese being murdered, especially during the mining industry. And in the Seattle riots that took place to expel the Chinese, the guns were used to protect the Chinese in this case. But throughout history, you hear stories about the weapons were also used against the Chinese. So there's this duality component about the weaponry. So I felt that it was important to include the weapons to express the fears and threats on the Chinese throughout history. Okay. Cheryl?
I have to unmute. I put up my artist statement, and I'll probably go into that a little bit more than Stuart did his, because this is a thread that runs through my work. Alice in Wonderland remains a favorite story of mine, and it has been since childhood. Navigating an underground world with a rabbit was my earliest experience with surrealism. The juxtaposition of shapes, images, scale, logic mimic the perceptions encountered when defining one's own reality, where one can create mental exercises for amusement or for more serious contemplation. As a fourth-generation Chinese American woman, my work often addresses the impact of legislation affecting ethnic communities from around the world. There are 3 areas of focus in my work currently, but not historically. These 3 areas are the US Chinese Exclusion Act, the Executive Order 9066, resulting in the relocation of the Japanese. The most recent focus for my work is the Jewish community established in Shanghai during World War II as they escaped the Nazis in Europe and the death camps. And this study about the Jewish flight to Shanghai is something that I learned about maybe in the last 10 years. I discovered that many of the Jewish people fled to Shanghai during World War II. And why? Because China was one of the only countries who didn't require a visa. After World War II, most of them fled, but there's still a contingent there, a small contingent there in Shanghai. And I have met some of them, and I'm starting to do research in that area. I find myself immersed in these parallel worlds of opposites in culture, politics, religion, justice, gender, and other aspects of the human condition. These provide my work with the universal symbolism for mutual understanding. And it's the idea of symbolism that I think that everybody from other cultures can associate with one form or another. This is studio work. We decided we would talk a little bit about our studio work. So I've been around for a number of years, and the piece on the left side is called Altered Heart. And it wasn't until recently that I realized how much Chinese influence was actually in some of my designs. And I think it was more from the artifacts that my grandmother had left with my parents. And so this piece on the left called Altered Heart was done when I was experiencing a lot of heartbreak. But this came from a bowl, a cloisonne bowl. Just the flowers and the technique came from an ancient Chinese tradition. I like to create environments, and this is like small. This is like maybe 15 inches by 15 inches. And it's in my studio work, it's not huge, but it's a good place for me to kind of examine the possibilities of making something bigger. Over the years, one thing that I discovered is that when you make something small and you make it bigger, bigger is not necessarily better. Sometimes it's a huge detriment to what you're trying to say. So on the right is my most recent piece. This one is an homage to Hazel Yang Lee. And she was a World War II fighter pilot. She was a woman trained by some of the best fighter pilots in the world. During the war, she applied to the United States government to fly jet planes for the US effort. But in spite of the fact that she could fly as well as anybody else and passed the entrance exams higher than most men, they denied her because she was a woman. So because China was our ally, she decided, well, let's go to China and I'll go fly for China. So she went to China and she passed all the rigorous exams and competed with the best of the men. But in the end, they said, no, I'm sorry. We're not going to hire you as a jet pilot because you're a woman. So what happened to Hazel, I think it's a very sad story. She was allowed to fly the jet planes, to deliver them from air base to air base. And during one of her flights, a man in the tower made a huge error and flew her into a mountain, and she died. So this is homage to Hazel Yang Lee. This is one of the earliest public artworks that I did back there in the 1980s. And this one's called Bridge to Brotherhood. And it was originally a call from King County for a project they called Art Against Racism. And I applied for it, and the budget was $1,000. And they wanted a poster. And as I started to assemble the thoughts about this poster, I thought, this is a much bigger conversation than a poster. So I went to the city of Redmond and I said, you know, I have this project I have $1,000 for, but can you help make it a little bit bigger? So we gathered community, and Leadership Redmond stepped forward. They were a high school group led by some of the businessmen. They put together an effort, and with in-kind donations, with cash donations, with community help, this became in 1984 a $100,000 project placed in a park. And so we created this little park we call Flagpole Park, and it's not very big. But the piece is 30 feet long by 6 feet high. And members of the community gathered together. And this bridge, if you'll notice, there's a texture on the bridge. When you look closely, those textures are actually photographs that the people contributed from the community who were the first immigrants in their families that came to the United States. Underneath the bridge are symbols of hate. There's a swastika, there's a knife, there's a rifle, there's a burning cross, and those are being swallowed up in the earth. What I wanted to do was to make the people on the bridge, I wanted to make them a unified community, and I put flower petals on their eyes so that it symbolized a sense of colorblindness. This is the center two panels of that piece, and in the lower part you could see the symbols of hate, and then you can see the photographs of the people. As you get close to it, the photographs emerge, and this was important for me to put these there as the building blocks of not only the bridge, but the foundation of the community. This is a piece not about hate, but about respite. This is called the Shrine of Hopes and Wishes. It was a mitigation project between Seattle's Metro and the county. This piece, again, it's not huge. This piece measures only about 12 feet wide by 12 feet high by 12 feet deep. I worked with the police because the location was in a high crime area. And I worked with community to find out what they wanted. And on both sides of this is in a median along Beacon Avenue. There is a very busy avenue on one side of the median and another busy side of the avenue on the other. And the people who came, and this was a neighborhood that was somewhat economically disadvantaged, and there was, quite a bit of crime. But the people who took the bus every day said, I would like a place where I can feel sheltered. I would like a place where I could feel a bit of respite. I would like a place where if it's pouring down rain and I need to cross the street, I might be able to duck for cover. And somebody said, I would like a piece where if, someone was going to attack it with graffiti or whatever, I would like a piece that would be durable. So we held several public meetings. And for those of you who wish to go into public art, I would say, be sure that you meet with your community. You'll get people who will come and support you. There will be people who don't come. And once the piece is up, you're going to get all kinds of comments that you didn't expect. And so this iteration was actually a second iteration of the design, because we were actually going to stretch these panels further, maybe 30, 40 feet apart with a path that went along. Well, one man came along who said, I'm looking at this, and he was of Chinese descent. And he said, well, these look like tombstones. I'm sorry, I don't want these. And if you don't change it, I'll call the newspaper. So these are the kinds of things that you expose yourself to when you're in public art. So we redid it, and we went back to the idea of a place of respite, a place of hope and wishes. So as the people went from work to home and home to work, they had a place that they could stop, a place of contemplation. We did plant a garden that went about 30 or 40 feet. So the shrubs that you see in the image, they are shrubs that some are peonies, so they'll be gone for, after a short while. There are roses that you'll see their skeletons that are important during the rest of the other seasons. But the interesting thing about this is that because I did so much community outreach, this again is somewhere in the 1980s that I did. Still, the people in the community take care of the flowers, they take care of the garden. And to this day, there has been not one bit of graffiti. And the panels, this is made of concrete and porcelain enamel, which is basically what your stovetop is made of. So when you realize how much you can scrub your stovetop, you realize how durable it is. But it is one of the most durable materials for public art. And I'm happy to say I was in research and development for the porcelain enamel industry for a number of years, and introduced a lot of artists who have public art pieces to use this process. This piece is at Garfield Elementary School. It's owned by the Washington State Arts Collection, and it's called First Marks. I met with the PTA, I met with the teachers, I met with the students, and I met with the parents. And they said, this is a very transient community, and they're all very poor. So what we would like to do to have for our kids and our adults is a way for us to remember this elementary school that our kids went to for the very first time and experienced education. So this piece is called First Marks because these are the tools that a child uses to make its first marks in life, and the tools that adults continue to use to guide their lives. And the ruler on the top kind of confines these tools so that they are they're creative, but they have a purpose. And this is a piece that will be installed in Seattle, in front of the the old Immigration Naturalization Services building. It's a part of the Japanese American Remembrance Trail project, and this is a maquette for it. So this piece is called Oracle Bones. The kimono represents the culture and history of the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated in concentration camps around the United States as a result of Executive Order 9066 during World War II. The calligraphy brushes are the extension of the mind and body of the Japanese Americans, their history and their future. The inset panel is placed on the kimono where a family crest is generally carried. A poem by poet W. Todd Kaneko, by the way, that's my son, carries a reminder about the camps and a message for future generations. The image is built upon an antique photograph of a strawberry field owned by Japanese farmers prior to the war. And up above, you can kind of see it maybe in your slide, and maybe it's a little bit hard, but there's a basket with some bones in it. Sending the bones of the deceased home is an ancient Asian tradition. Thousands of bones were sent across the seas to be buried in their homeland or hometowns to their final resting places. So it is 8 by 8 by 8. It's not huge, but it's a nice human scale. And I wanted people to be able to read the poem, to look into the photograph and see all of the history that's there. My work tends to be very, very colorful, but it's also very detailed. If you want to stop and look at it and contemplate it, there's a lot more to see. So this is the view from Gold Mountain. This is the piece that sits in front of the Albuquerque courthouse. I did want to say that the siting of this piece was very important because it is outside the courthouse and it is about a landmark court case. So one of the things that Stuart and I initially talked about was how do we picture balance without being so literal as putting out the scales of justice, because that was the most obvious thing. So we looked at the idea of a plumb bob. And I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember playing with a gyroscope. You put it on a string, you spin it, and it balances itself as it travels around. So this is kind of what this piece is. It's like this pendulum that goes in a circle and up onto the courthouse walls. And then we wanted to we wanted to look at the idea, what is that pot of gold? And Stuart and I said, well, it's obvious. The pot of gold is the rule of law. Stuart?
So next, what you're seeing here is a proverb from a well-known Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, who lived during the 6th century BC. And we picked this, we included this proverb in our installation, which is located, which is set in the pavement of the installation that you previously saw the image of our installation. It's in a swirl pattern, and it's placed inside in the circle here. So the swirl would be located approximately in this location here. So it's embedded in the pavement. And so this proverb is selected because we felt that we should honor and commemorate the Chinese laborers who immigrated to America and the challenges that they faced along the way. So Lao Tzu, he's a Chinese philosopher that teaches Taoism. That Taoism is a tradition that has been in China, that has shaped actually Chinese life for more than 2,000 years. So the proverb is, the Chinese saw great opportunities in America during the 1800s. And so this is one way of commemorating that. They immigrated across the ocean to claim their fortunes in work. Generations before us, actually made that long journey to America. Some were sent back to China, and some eventually return as paper sons, and thus continues their journey. And when I read this quote here, I think about my generations before me, such as my great-grandparents, who also made that journey over, to labor and work, such as in Hawaii, the banana plantation fields. They started businesses, and my grandmother, I've learned from my mother that my grandmother, when she made her journey over to America and ended up in Hawaii, to find that, she faced discrimination and exclusion. Exclusion laws were in place then. She was placed in quarantine for a year. So when I hear stories as such, so it hits close to home for me. So so that's why I feel that it's important for me to integrate our legacy and our struggles, honoring our struggles in our work. So next. Cheryl, next.
Unmute. Okay, as I said earlier, the people coming from China were searching for the Gold Mountain. At the time that this project was being built, the United States was trying to get rid of the dreamers. Do you remember the dreamers? They were trying to get rid of the children who were brought here from other countries with their parents, or they were actually born here. But we're focusing on the dreamers from China, but around the globe, they all streamed into America at the same time. And even the people from other countries were looking at not building the railroad, but the gold from the mines. And so suddenly a whole group of immigrants had entered the United States, which started to cause problems. So we focused on the dreams, and in the structure, you'll see clouds, and we'll explain a little bit more about the symbolism around the clouds.
So now we get to the heart of the New Mexico project, which focuses on and gives purpose of why this installation was built and installed. This is based on this important landmark case, is 1884 landmark case called Territory of New Mexico versus Yishan. So Yishan, he came to America for work as an immigrant and a laborer, and encounters his misfortune. Shun was convicted of second-degree murder and given a life sentence. So during that time, exclusion laws were in place, and our court system did not allow Chinese to testify in courts. So we were shut out of the court system then. So in his time, discriminatory laws, so the Chinese Exclusion Act was in place. And so in our nation's court system during the Exclusion Act period, denied the Chinese their constitutional right. In the 1884 case, a Chinese man's testimony was initially prohibited. The prosecution challenged the restriction. The rule was overturned, and the Chinese witness, Joe Chinaman, was allowed to testify against Shun. And so in subsequent years, the precedent established from this particular case spread to other courts thereafter. Next. Cheryl.
Cheryl.
Okay, sorry. As I mentioned earlier, we used this idea of a plumb bob as a metaphor for the scales of justice. And why did we do that? Well, when you look at a carpenter's plumb bob and you swing it, it goes in circles and it makes circles. And after a little bit of time, it achieves balance and centers itself. So the major piece in the installation is this giant plumb bob. And I do remember that we were looking for what does a plumb bob look like? And Stuart found something on his windowsill. It wasn't a plumb bob, but it was kind of like the perfect shape. And so from there, we decided, oh, this is what we really want to do. And like I said, we didn't want to use the scales of justice themselves for the image, because as we looked around Albuquerque before we even got the job, we decided, oh, they have lots of literal scales of justice, and we wanted to do something different. So the idea that a plum sways for a time and ultimately achieves balance.
Next, what you're seeing here depicts some of the process that we go through when developing a concept and taking concept to actualization of an installation. So typically, we start out with sketches, conceptual sketches, loose sketches. To the left, example of our initial sketch of the plum. As designers, we tend to over-design initially, and then we pare down based on what budget allows and what we feel is most important to a project. So as you can see that, it started out sort of designed and more, with undulated curved surfaces, but in our actual installation, it's more of a sleek look that we ended up in direction that we ended up taking. And then you see clay models, little clay sort of pieces here. So that's when we were sort of conceptualizing forms of our 3 gourds that are placed up above the plum. And then you have in the center section here, I've created a little maquette made out of sculpting polymer with a wire mesh in the center. So this is kind of fleshing out in 3 dimension, as opposed to doing the work in a CAD software program. So in this case, and I find that Cheryl and I, being makers and craft, that I think it's important that I think that this is how we work, and so we find that we communicate well, I think, as our collaborators, when we are able to work in this, taking this approach here in conceptualizing in 3D. And then you have a little more detail showing the braid, the Chinese queue. The Chinese men wore queues. And so we'll go into the symbolism of all these components in the other slides. But as you can see here, that it's showing how the braid would run up the center of the internal of the plum and open up to support the 3 gourds up above. So the process of solidifying the concept of the artwork into a 3D form. The plum, symbolic of the center of balance. Also, 2 components comprise the elements of the 3 branches of government. And so this is a 3-strand braid of the Chinese queue, and the 3 branches of government that uphold the rule of law. So that was important to address the rule of law. So by including the 3 branches of government, and also integrating the cultural heritage and traditions as well by including the Chinese queue. Next.
Let me add one more thing, and is that there's lots of surprises when you're making public art, and so we really like this undulated form, but we discovered that we didn't have the budget to do the undulated form, and fabricators said we can't do that. So that, coupled with a public comment that said, looks like a carrot. So we thought, okay, we can satisfy the public outcry, and we can satisfy our budget, and we can streamline this thing. So this is what the maquette ended up looking like. And I have to say, Stuart made this maquette, and it is beautiful. So he made the maquette, and incidentally, he was really clever. He could fold it up and put it in a suitcase, because we had to get this thing on an airplane and take it to Albuquerque. And he made this little suitcase for it. So it's like, it in itself is a work of art. We struggle. We didn't agree on everything. Stuart really likes bronze. But I heard the committee, I heard them say, we want color. Everything here in Albuquerque is brown and gray. And so once the maquette was done, I thought, you know what, let's bring community back into this. Let's bring the committee back into this, and let's let them have ownership of some of this. So I took the Stuart's model, and I, through Photoshop, dumped in this color potential on the side. And then during the meeting, we had a huge conversation of what is color? What color is red? Because somebody says, I want a red. And somebody else said, I want a yellow. And everybody had an opinion. Well, I kind of homed in early on that there was an interior designer on the committee. And I said, well, this is going to be outside. And the light will change. And as the light changes, the color will change. So if we make it red at night, it might look black. And so the interior designer said, light is what it's all about. And so she jumped in and she convinced the rest of the committee that, they didn't really need to choose the color and they would leave it up to us. So that helped us a lot. And so if you're in public art, you have to really listen to what the committee is saying, because those are your clues to what they really want and if you're going to get the job or not. Okay. Stuart.
Next, what you're seeing here is a timeline. And this timeline is embedded in our circle in the pavement. And so they dot the circle in the pavement that we had mentioned to you. Here we go. Yeah, so the timeline runs along the circle, and the circle dives partly into the building to help connect the installation to the building. So the timeline runs along the circle. Advance it, Cheryl, please, to the timeline. Okay, so here we're listing the important, significant legal cases after the fact that the Chinese Exclusion Act is in place and the Yishan case has happened. And so we wanted to also include other cases that were in part following cases after the precedence of the Yishan case. So as you can see, in 1894, the Wong Kim art case, and that is, let's see, 1894. That is the citizenship to, one moment, 1894, I'm sorry. That's the birthright citizenship. And then the 1924 grant citizenship, that citizenship to Native Americans born within the US. So that's happened in 1924, or actually 1925 here. And then you have in 1942, Bracero program, which brings Mexican labor into US for agricultural work. And following, then you have the 1964 outlaw discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. So that would be the civil rights case. And then you have in 1965, the lifting of the Exclusion Act was already in place because that ended in 1943. So remove discrimination against Asians and South and Eastern Europeans and ethnic groups as well. So in 1986, you have the legalize illegals to bring agricultural workers. And then in 2002, you have the Homeland Security Act, which is an overhaul of former immigration and naturalization services, counterterrorism policies in place. So the timeline is embedded in the pavement and corresponds to a interpretive panel that is mounted on the wall of the courthouse. Next.
Okay, so we wanted to start with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and bring it all up to present day. So what we saw was people came from around the globe and they came to seek their fortunes. Most people weren't rich when they came here. They were probably living in less than desirable circumstances, and they saw an opportunity to better themselves. So they came to seek their fortunes. And when they came, they brought with them their culture. And what does that mean? They brought their language, they brought their food, they brought their religions or spirituality, and they brought each other. And they brought with them their family associations. And their family associations were people who were Chinese people who were already here, who came from the same village. Therefore, they generally had the same last name. So they had their family associations to help them here. And among some of those family association members were very educated people. And when you start looking at Chinese American history, you will see that the Chinese used the rule of law, not their fists. They used the rule of law to gain strength and their rights in the United States. So what they really discovered was not gold in the mines. Some found gold, most didn't. Most got it stolen from them. But they discovered the real pot of gold was the rule of law.
Next, I'd like to talk about our components that comprise the installation. And Cheryl will elaborate on the meaning of each of the components. So first is the most important.
Just briefly, I think we're getting a little short on time, so we'd love to hear you talk about the next couple slides, but we were hoping to leave a little space for Q&A too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. So the components comprise of the main structure, the plumb bob, which is the central towering structure, and then you have the clouds that are circles around the plumb structure, and also on the arch on the wall, and then the circle in the pavement, which I've already mentioned, and where the plumb circles within the circle, and so that maps out like the path of the plumb. And then you have the cloud panel, which I've already mentioned, which comprise of the clouds that is on the wall of the courthouse that helps connect the freestanding installation to the courthouse. And then you have the dates inserted in the circle. And then you have the braid, which serves as the backbone for our sculpture, because we thought of it as a spine to our sculpture. And then you have the gourds that represents the three branches of government, and we selected the gourds because that's very common symbolic item throughout many cultures, especially minority cultures and ethnic cultures. And then you have the three-strand braid, which represents the Chinese queue, and the cloud seat, where one would be able to sit and contemplate on the installation. And then you have the spiral, which is that I also had covered with the text running in the center of the circle. Next.
Let me quickly go through the symbols since we're running out of time. So the clouds are of course, about dreams. The spiral is the path of life. The circle is wholeness or eternal or ideal or the cycle of time. The plumb, of course, which is one of the most important elements to me, is the idea of balance and the balance of justice. Stuart explained about the gourd, but the braid is one that is especially interesting to me because the Chinese men wore a braid or a queue. But one of the things that the committee wanted, they wanted to have this piece not just be about Chinese, but to be inclusive. So my thinking was the Chinese men wore a braid, but what culture doesn't braid their hair? So the braid is symbolic of all cultures that braid their hair. And the braid, incidentally, unwinds at the top to support the three gourds. And I think that we were very successful in satisfying the idea that this related to other cultures as well. So in the timeline, the thing that's important to me is the civil rights legislation, because in 1965, civil rights legislation was signed. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act was lifted, but it was not enforced until after the civil rights legislation. Stuart?
Next, you have the view of the installation during the day and at night, so you can see the effects of lighting on the installation. You know, providing a much stronger presence to the installation and highlighting specifics such as the plum that we felt that was most important, and then its relationship to the courthouse. So this gives you a sense of what the installation feels like, hopefully. And so I do encourage you, to visit when you're in Albuquerque at the Second Judicial Courthouse in Bernalillo County. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl and Stuart, for that incredibly informative and inspiring presentation. It was wonderful to get to know about the symbolism and the history behind your work and behind this particular project. We have, I'm so pleased, some students in curatorial courses and other museum studies courses here. And what you told us about the process of public art and the process of this artwork, I think is very informative. And Cheryl, you spoke specifically about the importance of public meetings and community collaboration. And I think actually curators and museums could learn a lot from the public art process and from how much community consultation is involved. More and more museums are moving towards that, and public art has been involved with community consultation for a long time. So I'll pull in also kind of a comment and a question from David, one of our students, who asked, was this about a different project? Was this something of your own, or was it a commission? Now he was talking about the Bridge of Brotherhood, but I guess the question I'd like to kind of turn that to both of you and say, can you talk a little bit more about that balance also that you find between kind of the curatorial ideas coming from the community and those coming from the artists, and how you balance those things and come to complete a work like this?
Maybe I should talk about this because I've had problems when I didn't do community outreach. When I did do community outreach, there's still no guarantee, because the lone voice out there probably was the one who didn't come. But I think that as far as balancing, you have to realize that this is a commission. You are the person who's going to be designing. The committee is your client. They're paying the bills. The taxpayers are also your client. They're paying the bills. So I think that you have to, it's not like studio work. You can bring some ideas in, but you can't do everything you want to do. Stuart?
Yeah. So I'd like to, put my 2 cents in this. For me, I think it has been taking on projects such as this has opened up a lot of opportunities and channels for me as an artist. I've been having lately a thirst of being more involved in community related projects as a way of lifting a community, informing a community, as well as informing myself. I've gained so much information, learning from the sharing of stories within our community, learning so much about other people's histories, and how does that intertwine with my history. And, there's a lot of overlapping in common experiences. And I think it's a great way for me to exercise and take it and take my my visual talents that I have and turn it into as an avenue, as a speaker to the community, to have a voice in the community. I think it's very important that each and every one of us voice our experiences and share our experiences. So by honoring these experiences through through public art, I think is a great way to take your voice to a larger audience. Whereas, a studio work would be a little more it's an intimate setting. And so the limitations on what audiences that you're going to reach out to, gallery artists, gallery viewers versus, public sector where it's out there in the public. Projects is a larger scale, larger budget. So you're able to do more, you're able to say more through your projects, through your public art projects.
Thank you so much. And we have so many good questions. So I'll tie a couple things together. One, we had a question from Daryl about whether this was, there was a competition for this particular project, which is usually the case for public works. Was this the case here? Yeah. And maybe I'll throw in while you're thinking about this, how that this particular work became focused on this particular law. Particular lawsuit.
Okay. Yes. It was open competition. I think originally, I don't know how many people they had. This was a second call. And it was really unusual because they had selected an artist, but then they said, no, we really don't like what she's done. Mm-hmm. So let's throw it open again.
Yeah. So it was a national call.
Yeah. But I think that in the end, I think there were like 65 people who applied for it.
Yes, so these are definitely competitive, and there is a whole process, of a long process, which involved that incredibly beautiful maquette that you brought, to the site and to the committee to look at. Dawn also asked an interesting question about: do you need permits? Is this something the artist obtains, or is that something that the commissioning body is responsible for? So maybe to speak just a little bit about what the artist is responsible for in a monuments or a public works commission versus maybe what is the commissioning body responsible for?
I think it depends because, as a commissioner for state, county, and city, it all depends because we had artists approach us to say, I won't pay for sales tax. I won't pay for engineering. I won't pay for it. So it depends on how savvy you are and how gutsy you are. But I think that generally in your contract, there is going to be permits, there's going to be travel, there's going to be engineering, there's going to be everything that they can put in there for your contract. And as the artist, you're responsible for all of it. But that's not to say you can't stand your ground. So it's some of all of it.
Yeah. And also I'd like to add to that. So depending on like where the art is going to be cited, whether it's going to encroach in the right of way of public domain, so would determine what sorts of permits you'll need, and then those are also worked into your budget. So early on, so all of that should be made aware early on in the project where it's cited, and so what sorts, who's involved, what agencies will be involved. Is it the Department of Transportation? Is it the utilities department, the city's utilities? So all of that is taken into consideration.
Thank you so much. And I think with the time that we're at now, I will go ahead and pass the mic to Dr. Laura Cohen to close the program. Thank you both for everything, and thank you all to the students for all of your excellent comments and questions you've been sharing.
Cheryl and Stuart, I've been sitting here just really, really moved at all of the different connections in your work to represent significant milestones, to represent different communities, and to really bring to life so much of this history in a way that is not only resonant with the topic. I'm sort of trying to put this all together here. I spend a lot of time looking at memorials and museums around the world. And I spent a lot of time, especially with human rights monuments and memorials. And I'm really just struck by how much you involve the community and how much research you did, and really the thoughtfulness in putting together structures that not only sort of symbolize these moments and mark them, but also live within the greater communities and spaces that they exist in. And I really just want to thank you both. It's also been really fascinating to listen to the way you go about your work and all of the different kinds of inspiration. It's each of these monuments speaks to the collective, but they become very, very personal, and people take individual meanings from them. And just really grateful for you both sharing of your time and so generously, exploring with our audience all these different interconnections. And, I'm a genocide studies scholar, and as I mentioned to you both before, most of my work has been in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But you mentioned specifically related to the Holocaust, the Jewish population that fled to Shanghai, and that's also been a very significant relationship. And I'm just wanting to make sure that we continue this dialogue with you, and perhaps even do another presentation at some point to kind of explore, because there's so many things that you've been involved with. So thank you to Kat, and thank you to Marissa, thank you to Stuart, thank you to Cheryl, and thank you for everyone for tuning in today. We hope you stay safe and well, and on behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, we will see you soon at our next event. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.